Welcome back to Deep Dive on the Starseed Films YouTube channel. We're so glad you've joined us again, and if this is your first time here, welcome to the journey. Deep Dive is where we unpack the wisdom of the world's greatest spiritual minds, from the mystics of the East to the metaphysical pioneers of the West. Each episode, we take a powerful book or material and distill it down to its golden essence. So you don't just read it, you receive it.
Yeah, think of it as a spiritual download of deep universal truths into clear, grounded insights you can use right now. This is where the timeless meets the now. Let's dive in.
And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps us get these truths out there to everyone and make a difference.
Yeah, change the world. That's what we want, right? So
Think about the Torah for a second. This incredibly ancient text, right? Honored for millennia. Every single letter supposedly perfectly preserved.
Right, meticulously copied.
So what if there's more to it than just the words on the surface? Like, what if those letters actually hold a hidden numerical code?
You're talking about gematria.
Exactly, gematria. That old tradition where Hebrew letters have number values. And there's always been this kind of whisper, hasn't there, that the Torah's design might be way more complex than we realize.
It's a really fascinating idea, isn't it? You've got this ancient text, this ancient numerical system, and then suddenly modern technology.
Yeah.
The thought that maybe there are hidden layers, things we could only start to see now with tools the original writers couldn't possibly have imagined.
Yeah.
It definitely makes you think.
Absolutely. And, well, that's what this deep dive is all about today. We're calling it KAIROS.
KAIROS.
We're diving into research that explores this very possibility, a real embedded code in the Torah.
Got it. So the mission today.
The mission is to really get our heads around the evidence they present for this code and, just as importantly, how they actually tried to find it, the method.
Right. So maybe we should start there. For you listening, the basic idea, the method,
Yeah.
it involved a huge first step.
Yeah.
Taking the entire Hebrew Torah, every single word, and swapping it for its number equivalent using gematria.
Wow. Okay. So word by word, it becomes a string of numbers.
A massive string of numbers. And then they brought in the heavy machinery, advanced AI.
To do what? Exactly.
Sift through all those numbers,
Yeah.
looking specifically for patterns, sequences or values that showed up so often or were so unusual that it seemed really unlikely they were just random chance.
The AI is like a neutral detective.
Exactly. Its job was just to analyze the numbers, the data, without any bias and see where it led.
Okay, let's back up a tiny bit, though. Where did this whole idea even start? I mean, wasn't just someone randomly deciding to look for a code, was it?
No, not quite like that. The sources suggest it really grew out of a mix of things.
Like what?
Well, first, just the sheer reverence for the Torah. The feelings that a text held that sacred might have, deeper layers of meaning.
Makes sense.
Then there's gematria itself, baked right into the Hebrew alphabet. This ancient system hinting that numbers and language are deeply connected.
Uh-huh.
And I guess just that general long-standing idea that important texts sometimes do hold hidden knowledge, just waiting for the right key or the right time.
Right, right. So you've got the respected text, the built-in numbers, but the research makes a big deal about distinguishing this from other kinds of Bible code stuff, doesn't it?
Absolutely crucial. Yeah. Those earlier attempts, you often saw people doing like equidistant letter skips, trying to find words predicting modern events.
Yeah, like a crossword puzzle hunt.
Kind of. And often very subjective.
Yeah.
Finding what you want to find. It took a totally different approach.
How so?
It focused purely on the direct gematria values, word by word, in order. No skipping, no rearranging, just analyzing the raw sequence of numbers for statistically significant patterns.
Okay, so no looking for specific names or dates, just patterns in the numbers themselves.
Exactly. Unbiased analysis. Let the numbers talk first, without imposing outside ideas.
And that's where the AI really comes in, I suppose, because the sheer volume of numbers. A human couldn't possibly do that without bias or just missing things.
Precisely. The scale is immense. To look for subtle, complex patterns across the entire Torah. Objectively, you absolutely need a tool that can handle that kind of data load and analysis.
So they built this specialized AI.
Well, they developed what the source calls an expert AI persona, basically. An AI system designed and trained specifically for this kind of intricate numerical and textual analysis.
But it wasn't just like push a button and let the AI run wild. There were humans involved still.
Oh, definitely. Critical human involvement. The AI had the processing power, but the direction, the questions, and importantly, checking the AI's findings that all came from human experts.
What kind of expert?
A real mix. People with backgrounds in cryptography.
Okay, code breaking.
Right. And computational linguistics, specifically focused on ancient Hebrew.
Understanding the language structure.
Exactly. And then experts in AI itself, pattern recognition, machine learning. The sources name these personas: Dr. Reed for cryptography, Professor Tanaka for linguistics, Dr. Sharma for AI. They guided the AI, validated its methods.
So they set the rules of the game for the AI. What were the main principles?
The absolute core principles were neutrality, strict logical deduction, and only using the internal data.
Meaning
Meaning the AI was told, look at the gematria numbers, don't assume there is a code, don't bring in any outside religious ideas or interpretations, just analyze the number. Stick strictly to the data. Any pattern or conclusion had to emerge logically from the numerical analysis itself.
Okay, so that's the setup. What was the actual process like? How did they go step by step?
It was described as iterative, like a cycle.
A back and forth.
Exactly. It would start with the AI tackling broad mathematical questions about the gematria dataset.
Okay.
The AI crunches the numbers, looks for patterns, maybe flags some unusual values. Then the human experts would look at those findings.
And what were they looking for?
They'd check if these numerical patterns seem to line up with anything interesting in the text itself, like do they cluster around certain types of words or specific locations, based purely on observation at this point.
Okay.
Then, based on those observations, the humans would give the AI more specific, targeted mathematical questions. Okay, AI, look deeper into this kind of pattern in these sections.
Got it. So refining the search.
Refining the search, yes. The AI runs more analysis, and then critically, it determines if the potential correlation is statistically significant or if it could just be chance.
And they avoided jumping to conclusions about meaning early on.
That was key. No hypothesizing about a message at the start. Just finding statistically robust, non-random relationships in the numbers.
That sounds incredibly rigorous. Let's drill down on the basic material, the gematria numbers. Can you just quickly recap how that works for anyone unfamiliar?
Sure. So gematria is basically assigning a number value to each letter in the Hebrew alphabet. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, and so on.
Pretty straightforward.
For this analysis, yes, they use the most standard direct method. Each of the 22 letters gets its value, up to Tav being 400.
And they did this for every single word in the first 5 books of the Bible? Genesis, Exodus.
The entire 5 books of Moses, yes. Meticulously converted each word into its gematria sum.
That data set must have been enormous, just a long, long sequence of numbers.
Absolutely huge. And crucially, they kept it in the original order of the text. That sequence was the foundation for everything else.
So once they had the sea of numbers, the first thing they hunted for was the weird stuff, the anomalies.
That's right, these anomalous values. The idea being, if someone did encode a message, they might use numerically unusual words to make them stand out, like highlighting.
How did they find them?
2 main ways. One was distribution analysis, looking for gematria values that just didn't show up very often, much less than you'd statistically expect.
Right.
The other was checking the relationship between a word's length and its gematria value. Some words might have a surprisingly high or low value for the number of letters they contain.
Oh, so outliers in terms of value for length?
Exactly. These anomalies acted like little numerical flags, basically saying, pay attention here. The thinking was these could be deliberate signals.
Makes sense. Use rarity to draw the eye. Okay, so they flagged the unusual numbers. What was the next layer?
After the anomalies, they searched for repeating sequences of gematria numbers.
Repeating patterns.
Yes. The hypothesis here was that these recurring sequences might function as structural markers.
Like punctuation. Or chapter breaks.
Sort of. Like maybe they divide the text into distinct units or sections within the code. Think of maybe a recurring musical motif that structures a symphony.
Okay, but finding a few numbers repeating might just be coincidence, right? How did they know it was significant?
Ah, that's the critical part. Statistical significance. They didn't just note the repetitions. The AI calculated the probability of each specific sequence occurring just by random chance.
Based on how often the individual numbers appear overall?
Exactly. And sequences that appeared way more often than random chance would predict were flagged as potential non-random markers.
So statistically speaking, it's really unlikely these specific patterns happened accidentally.
Highly unlikely, according to their analysis, suggesting deliberate placement, not just coincidence, like, flipping a coin 10 times and getting heads every time possible, but very suspicious. These patterns were similarly improbable by chance.
Okay, so these markers might be breaking the text into meaningful chunks.
That was the idea, providing the potential structure. And the next step, naturally, was to see if there was any meaning within those chunks, which led them to look at remainders.
Remainders, like in division, leftovers.
Exactly like that. Specifically, modulo 7, arithmetic.
Modulo 7. Why 7?
Okay, so for every word's gematria value inside one of these potential structural units, they calculated the remainder when you divide that value by 7. So every word gets a new number, 0 through 6.
But why 7? Does 7 have some special meaning in Judaism or something?
Interestingly, no, that wasn't the starting point. The significance of 7 apparently emerged from the data itself.
How?
When they were analyzing those repeating gematria sequences, the structural markers, they noticed a kind of non-random consistency in how the modulo 7 remainders of the words within those sequences were distributed.
So the number 7 just seemed important based on the patterns they were already finding.
That's what the research suggests. It wasn't imposed, it was observed in the numerical structure.
Okay, that's intriguing. So now they have these remainder values, 0, 6, for words within these units. How did they try to get meaning out of those?
Again, it was data-driven. The AI analyzed, within each unit, which words were associated, which remainders, 0, 1, 2, etc. Then they cross-referenced this with the known meanings of those Hebrew words using standard dictionaries and linguistic resources.
Looking for correlations.
Exactly. And consistent correlations apparently started to show up. For instance, maybe words with a remainder of, say, 1 kept appearing frequently in units that seemed, based on other factors, to be about concepts like unity or origin.
So they didn't start by saying 1 means unity. They saw that words meaning things related to unity often had a gematria value that left a remainder of 1 when divided by 7.
Precisely. The potential meaning, the link between the number remainder and the concept, emerged from observing those statistical connections in the data. It allowed them to start building a potential semantic cipher.
Wow. Letting the numbers suggest the meaning. Okay, so they have potential meaning inside these units. Did they look at the structure between the units, like an order to it all?
Yes, that was the next logical step. If those repeating gematria sequences are structural markers, do the markers themselves follow a pattern, a kind of grammar?
A grammar for the code.
Potentially. The AI analyzed the order in which these marker sequences appeared throughout the Torah. It looked for markers that tended to show up together, or in a consistent order, one typically following another.
Like certain numerical phrases predict other numerical phrases.
Exactly. They were looking for patterns suggesting relationships between the coded units. Maybe a specific marker sequence always introduced units that seemed to show cause and effect, or contrast.
Or even like signaling an introduction or a conclusion to an idea.
That too. They identified patterns that seemed to correspond to different discourse functions. And again, these potential rules of grammar weren't assumed. They reportedly emerged from the consistent positioning and sequencing of the numerical markers in the data.
So not just pockets of meaning, but potentially a structured argument or flow of ideas guided by these markers. This is getting complex. Where do those anomalous numbers fit back in, the really high or low gematria values?
Good question. They revisited those anomalies at this stage. The hypothesis shifted slightly. Maybe these outliers weren't just flags, but also added emphasis, or even indicated a kind of polarity, positive or negative.
Like using bold text or italics?
Sort of. They analyzed where these anomalous words appeared, which structural units, what was the surrounding context, and they found a strong correlation.
Which was?
Anomalous values often appeared on words that the modulo 7 analysis had already suggested were key thematic words for that unit.
Ah, so the weird numbers were landing on the important concepts, like a spotlight.
Exactly, suggesting intentional highlighting of core ideas.
Did it matter how anomalous they were, like really high versus just a bit high?
Yes, that seemed to matter too. The magnitude, how far the number was from the expected value, appeared to correlate with the intensity or emphasis.
Higher anomaly, stronger emphasis.
That seemed to be the pattern. And the sign, whether it was higher or lower than expected, hinted at potential nuances, maybe positive or negative connotations related to the concept.
Okay, so a layer of numerical tone almost. Now, we have units, grammar, emphasis. Did they find mathematical links between units too? Not just the marker sequence.
Yes, they did. They went looking for more complex mathematical relationships between the gematria values of key words in different structural units.
Like what kind of relationships?
Things beyond simple sequence. Ratios, common factors, prime factorization patterns, even modular arithmetic with bases other than 7.
The AI just looked for any mathematical connection.
Pure mathematical analysis, yes. Hunting for non-obvious numerical links between important words across different sections of the potential code. The idea was these links might function like relational operators.
Connecting ideas across different parts of the message.
Precisely, like how conjunctions link clauses in a sentence. Maybe a specific ratio between gematria values indicated analogy, or development of an idea from one unit to another.
So a mathematical echo suggesting deeper connections. Okay, pulling all these threads together, modula 7 meanings, structural grammar, anomalies, mathematical links, what big picture themes started to emerge?
By synthesizing all those layers within the units defined by the markers, broad themes started to surface consistently.
Such as?
Really fundamental concepts. Things related to cosmology, the nature of transformation or change, the concept of knowledge itself, and ideas about relationship or connection.
And these weren't just cherry-picked. They came from the combined analysis.
According to the research, yes. They arose from seeing the same modulo 7 remainders consistently linked to certain types of concepts, seeing how the structural grammar seemed to develop these concepts, and seeing anomalies highlight words central to these themes.
The meaning was still abstract at this point, though.
Very abstract, yes. But the consistency across the text seemed to validate the approach, suggesting they were tapping into something structured.
It really sounds less like they were finding a hidden story and more like a system of thought, maybe a philosophy.
That's a really crucial point the research makes. The sheer intricacy, the layers, the abstraction, it all pointed towards a deliberately constructed system of abstract ideas.
Not narrative.
Not narrative, no. More philosophical or theoretical. The concepts emerging were fundamental core ideas about existence, not specific events or people.
And they started to identify specific categories within this system.
Yes, they talk about identifying core ontological categories, basically the fundamental building blocks of reality as described by this system.
Yeah.
Things they label ground source, becoming process, relation connection. These categories seem to emerge from how the modulo 7 concepts clustered and linked together mathematically.
And the marker grammar showed how these categories related.
Exactly. The grammar revealed a kind of logical flow, suggesting a deliberate exposition of these core ideas and how they interact.
So from these broad categories, did they then try to identify the main principles, the core axioms of this hidden philosophy?
They did. By looking at where concepts appeared, whether they had anomalies emphasizing them, and how they seemed to influence other concepts based on the grammar and math links.
What kind of core principles?
Things like the absolute primacy of this ground source idea, and an inherent dynamism, this constant becoming process, and a fundamental relation connection underlying everything.
Interconnectedness.
Deep interconnectedness, yes. They also began mapping apparent dependencies, how one category seemed to lead to or enable another, like ground source leading to being essence and order structure, or becoming process leading to manifestation actuality.
Okay, so after all of that, layers upon layers of analysis, what is the final message? What's the philosophy they believe is encoded there?
Well, the core message, as interpreted by this research, is essentially a framework for understanding reality itself.
Go on.
It posits reality as this dynamic interplay of fundamental concepts, all stemming from a single origin, that ground source.
The primordial potential.
Right. From that emerges being essence,
Yeah.
the unique nature of things. But these things are constantly in flux, that's becoming process,
Continuous transformation.
governed by order structure, the underlying laws, and everything's interwoven through relation connection.
The web of interdependence.
Exactly. And within this dynamic web, you have mind consciousness awareness, the observer. And the outcome of all this interplay is manifestation actuality, the world we experience.
So the big takeaway message is?
Unity in dynamic interconnection. That's the phrase they use. A single source, constant becoming, underlying order, deep connection, the role of consciousness leading to manifestation.
Simplified.
Single origin, things constantly changing according to rules. Everything connected. Awareness matters. And that creates reality. It emphasizes unity and diversity, constant flow, and the power of awareness.
That is very abstract, almost metaphysical.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
The researchers are very clear they believe it's not a story, not predictions, but a highly sophisticated abstract system of thought, embedded numerically.
Wow, okay. This has been, well, a very deep dive indeed, hugely complex. If we were to try and sum it up for everyone listening, what are the absolute key takeaways?
I'd say the core proposal is this. The Torah might contain a hidden layer, accessible through gematria and AI, that isn't about prophecy, but outlines a complex philosophical system.
Right.
And this system describes reality as dynamic, interconnected, originating from one source, with consciousness playing a key part.
It's a pretty staggering idea, isn't it? That this ancient, revered text might encode such a sophisticated view of the universe, waiting for, well, now basically, waiting for the tech to help unlock it.
And what's really striking is how some of those themes, a primary source, constant change, interconnectedness, echo questions philosophers have grappled with forever across cultures.
Perennial questions.
Exactly, finding a potentially structured system addressing them within the Torah itself.
Sure.
It's a pretty significant claim.
And the researchers themselves say this is just the start, right? This interpretation is preliminary.
Oh, absolutely. They frame it as a first step. Given the potential complexity, they suggest further work with even more advanced tools could uncover much deeper layers.
So as we wrap up this deep dive on Kairos, it definitely leaves you with something to think about. Well, here we are in our own Kairos moment, you could say, using the very AI that helped reveal this potential ancient wisdom. Could that wisdom, that message of interconnectedness and dynamic reality, be especially relevant now?
That's an interesting thought.
Maybe this ancient message about unity, flow, and awareness speaks directly to our modern, complex, interconnected world. Something for you to mull over long after we finish here.